And one of the great aspects and great principles of the Chekhov work is contrasts and opposites. And these opposites are all around us. We experience them all the time. The big archetypal contrasts, of course, are life and death, sleeping, awakening, winter, summer, and so on. But of course, that's a duality. There are two things there. It's most important to begin to experience through movement, and it can only be experienced through movement. These, the third element within these opposites, I call it the changeover from one to the other. You can experience in your breathing, it's not just in and out, breathing in and out, but it's also the breath changes. The top of the breath, when you breathe in, there's a moment there where it's not either in or out, but it's a changeover, and to experience that, and you experience it at the bottom of the breath as well. For example, in giving and receiving, there's a wonderful exercise I do with a ball to begin to experience, and not just giving or receiving, that's machine-like, it's like a piston, it just goes like this way. But by the ball exercise, we begin to experience this outside element, the third element that I call it, or the third factor, the outside world. So you actually have to come out and throw the ball to someone, which means you don't stay within your subjective self. The other element is that someone catches the ball. When they catch the ball, they have to throw it back to someone else. It doesn't have to be to the same person if you're working within a group. And that receiving has to change over into giving. And in the movement, you experience it with your arm. And with that movement of the arm, catching the ball in front, pulling it back down and behind you, that's where we begin to experience the changeover element. And when we experience the changeover element, we begin to experience the area where we live as actors. It's not outside we live, nor is it inside ourselves, in our subjective selves we live. That we live in that changeover period. And in that changeover period, all sorts of things can drop in, and all sorts of things can be received again on many different levels. On a thinking level, new thoughts can come. By the way, this is a great exercise to build up to the improvisation work. Improvisation work in the Chekhov sense is not just improvising well and thinking quickly on my feet. It is a means to an end, not an end to itself. So in this changeover, this third element, we could call it the gap, but the gap is like an empty space. It's a space that is continually moving from receiving, moving, changing over to giving. It's the secret of the pause as well. And that pause can be as long as you wish or as small as you wish. But it's most important that changeover is there. And it has an extraordinary, that exercise, working with giving, receiving, and changing over, can actually be applied as a fundamental basis to all of the Chekhov exercises, because it's where we live in that changeover as actors, where the thoughts, feelings, imagination, pictures, and the inspiration can come. Things become mechanistic and not spontaneous, and we're all striving. I think every actor and every technique or method strives for spontaneity. You could call it the sense of truth. That sense of truth is not to be found within your feeling life by pushing your feeling life, by trying to be true. That's quite a revolutionary thought, actually, because if I'm not feeling it, is it true? If I'm not feeling it, is the audience feeling it? That's the big question. So it allows us, this changeover element, to really come into the spontaneity of the now. You know, this extraordinary book by Tollo called The Power of Now. And there's a technique for that. Otherwise, it just becomes a lot of theory and a lot of abstract wanting to do something. There are techniques to allow us to experience the now, and the changeover exercise, the ball exercise of giving, receiving the ball, changing over, and giving it again is a real powerful and very potent exercise to allow us to come to that spontaneity and that freshness each time within our work, because we're living within we're living within the living moment. This exercise, the changeover exercise, can really allow us to prepare for rehearsals, so that we're actually in that zone already, that we're able to listen. That's a receiving. A listening is a receiving. And I think the receiving element is one of the most important things in acting. We feel acting is like, with the word acting, action, and doing something. But we have to receive something to give it. Today we live very much within just doing and giving and being out there, and in a way pushing. But we actually have to receive something. If we didn't receive our breath, if our breath didn't come into us from outside, we wouldn't last very long at all. And I think the exercise is very useful for preparing for rehearsal, and also preparing yourself when you're working and working on your script and on the part at home. Otherwise, we tend to want to be doing something. I want to do this with this character. This is my interpretation, and that's a pushing. Whereas even when you read a script, I believe, for the first time, we read this way. Our eyes are here, we read this way. Actually, what happens is our eye sees the page, and then the page and what's on it comes to us. And in that sense, if we get into that, if we change over into that, not just reading, I'm looking, but actually let the book look at me. Let the words look at me. Let me receive those words. And in that sense, it's the same changeover element that we're working with. So it can be very, very helpful for preparation at home and in the rehearsal. And working with your fellow actors. You learn the lines, so you just give them. But you've got to actually receive the line from the other person. Not just the words, but you have to receive their whole being. Not just looking at them, but sensing them, taking them into you, receiving it, seeing what that does to the inner life of the character, and then giving that out. If we don't have that changeover, we have factory acting, we have mechanistic acting, and we have what I call heavy breathing acting. It's a lot of emotion, but it doesn't really create anything pleasurable for you and also for the audience.